Okay, so the current storyline in One Punch Man has to do with Espers because we saw lately that there's this organization called Tsukuyomi, which is apparently run by Espers. But not only that, but they're also experimenting on Espers, also making them somehow. We also found out that they are the ones responsible for imprisoning Tatsumaki when she was a child. Like when we saw that flashback of Blast saving her from that facility, also picking up a cube in the process. And since we saw that, we always wondered, like, so what does that have to do with all of this stuff? And, like, why did Blast go there? I mean, we know because of the cube, but it's like, is Blast connected with the Espers because he somehow knows Tatsumaki and Fubuki? And, so we're basically going to be talking about everything that has to do with that in this video. And I have anime anxiety here with me. Finally, I got somebody I could talk about One Punch Man with, guys, on the channel. So what do you think about Blast in relation to Tatsumaki? Obviously, he's not like a one-for-one power set that they have. Very different, but somehow similar. So what are your thoughts, or at least initial thoughts?
I mean, I think with especially with the timeline of, when Tatsumaki was given to the research facility and like recently how we found out that Blast started his whole mission against God like 20 years prior to like the current timeline. It just lines up so much to where like it's almost like, see, I used to think that Blast used to be either maybe Tatsumaki's father or maybe somebody that was like a part of his team that we got, revealed to as well in that same chapter was like maybe her actual father, and he's kind of just like her stepfather now, kind of looking over her, because there's just been like different points throughout the manga, I feel like, where like he has this personal connection with her, like that, like it's more than just like him knowing who she is, and he busted her out of that research facility. Like, how did he even know she was there, And I don't know, I just feel like there's something there, especially just because she, I don't know. I always thought they kind of had this like father daughter bond. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm in the same camp. Whether he's her father or something, I do think it's very likely that he's related to Tatsumaki and Fubuki in some way. Other than just, him showing up at that facility, because I thought about that too for the longest time. I was like, why would he show up there other than to just save her, seemingly? But then also you could just have the excuse that it was all coincidence. He was tracking down the cubes, found that the cube was at the Tsukuyomi place, and it was just a coincidence that Tatsumaki was there and he rescued her. That's plausible, but also, he probably knew that she was there too, and maybe the cube was also coincidentally there.
Yeah. And how did he even know that she had a sister?
Ooh, yeah, that's a good one. Him putting his hand on his head, on her head, and that raised the question. It's like, okay, so did he like read her mind somehow, or did he just know because he's related to them or something?
Yeah, and I mean that's like, I think like the biggest like hint there that like he is either related to her or something, or the other idea is that he is also an Esper, and with Espers being able to kind of read minds or connect with other people mentally, it would make perfect sense then too that he's an Esper that can do that, and that's just kind of like a slight hint from one letting us know like, yeah, Blast can do this stuff.
Exactly. And I'm glad you brought that up because that'll bring us to, one of the big topics of the video. And it's like, is Blast an Esper? Because I don't know at this point. For the longest time, I thought that he was because it made sense. Even before we saw him, the only thing that we were really able to go off of was what Miss F, quote unquote, who was just Fubuki with her with a line through her eyes in the One Punch Man encyclopedia. There's like this little excerpt where she says that Blast can like control robots and stuff, and that he's stronger than King or something like that. I'll have it up on the screen. But the most important thing that she says here is that he's an Esper. Like, she just says straight up, Blast is an Esper. And I was like, okay.
Oh.
And then also apparently he could shoot lasers from his eyes.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So we haven't seen him do that. And for the longest time, I thought Blast was supposed to be like Superman, and he kind of is, but not exactly.
Yeah.
Um, he's kind of like Superman, Green Lantern. He's like a fusion of that stuff, more so than
Yeah.
just strictly like a Superman type guy that I thought he was. I'm
Yeah, with a
also
little. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm also probably responsible for a lot of that Blast artwork. If you've ever seen like with him shooting lasers out of his eyes, I got a lot of that commissioned before he was revealed.
Hey, I mean,
Um,
and the only other person you see that can shoot lasers out of their eyes is Psychos, at least that I can remember off the top of my head. So
Precisely.
it's
That's where I was
yeah. So
going next. I'm glad you brought that up because
oh
we saw Psychos do that against Tatsumaki, like in the first round of their fight. Um, but then we also saw Psychos kind of do it as Giro Giro, like had all those eyeballs come around Tatsumaki, and they all like fired those like laser lightning things. And after they hit Tatsumaki, she was like, "Ooh, that's an impressive, elegant, nuanced adaptation of your psychic powers," or whatever. She says something like that,
yeah.
which implies that I think she also says like, "Who taught you?" or "Who trained you in how to do this?" Which is like, okay, so that means that Tatsumaki was probably trained or has some knowledge of this, despite her never doing this ability herself. And then I was thinking, okay, because Blast trained her then, I guess, right? I mean, that makes sense. It wasn't like Blast was always away on his god mission, you know, keeping the dimensional barrier sealed. So maybe he trained Tatsumaki at some point, and that's how she's aware of the laser eye beam abilities.
Yeah, I mean, and there's just that huge time gap where he busted her out of the research facility, and the present time where I mean, it is never like explicitly said that that was the last time she saw him. Like, and I think I'm hoping that like in these next couple chapters we get like another Blast update, maybe another Blast flashback or something, because yeah, you're right. I mean, it's very possible that he could have trained her to use her powers well, because with how much like raw psychic power she has, it'd be kind of hard to believe that she trained herself and kind of figured out how to control it herself. So Blast kind of interjecting once in a while would make a ton of sense, especially because, like you just said, he can also do these kind of energy projection abilities. Like, I mean, his is totally unique on its own. It's to me, I always kind of thought that like Blast, his powers are like the epitome of what, Espers and psychics are capable of. Like, it's like on a whole nother tier. And like Tatsumaki's like just a step below that, because we see that she can like kind of do energy projection type abilities to a sense, like in the when she was busting into the Hero Association a couple chapters back, like was like surrounded by psychic energy, so she can do that kind of stuff. It's just like we haven't seen her, you know, shoot lasers or anything like that quite yet, or like shoot out like key blaster, for lack of a better way to explain it.
Yeah, what also makes me think that is the fact that one also made Mob Psycho, which also has like an Esper power scale to it, and it is similar to how you described it. Like there's levels to it, and not all Espers are created equal. And like at the standard Esper level, they could just do telekinesis and telepathy and stuff like that. But then when you get to the highest level, like Suzuki or Mob going all out, then they just start manipulating reality essentially at that point. So with the Espers in One Punch Man, you have like the regular ones around like Fubuki level, stuff like that. Then you have the monsters like Tatsumaki that can just utmost use the basic abilities to their highest degree. And then you have like the highest level, which is Blast, where he's like literally manipulating space time.
Right, and that's, I feel like the epitome of psychic potential is like fourth dimensional type stuff, like with the third eye and with what Blast can do, manipulating gravity and being able to travel between dimensions seemingly. It makes so much sense that like the next step up is what that is, and we just haven't seen anybody else other than Blast be able to do that.
Yeah, you're right about the third eye too. That's another like going into that, just literally seeing the future. That is totally in that tier as well, which is really cool. And it seems like I don't know. I guess you can learn the third eye ability because it's implied that Psychos did. Like, she didn't inherently have it. So I guess you can also learn the, the space-time warping stuff. But then that also raises the question of, okay, so if Blast is an inherent Esper, which I guess he is at this point, because for a long time I thought that maybe Blast like reverse engineered his powers from the cube or something, because we know that, if you touch the cube, God speaks to you. If you accept his deal, then he makes you powerful in some way. But if not, then you basically die. And I thought maybe Blast accepted the deal, but he did something to like fight away from God's control, similar to what Garo did, but maybe even a better case where he just kept entirely his humanity. But no, it's pretty much not the case, because we saw that 20 years ago he discovered the cube, and he was already pretty much Blast at that point and had his abilities, or at least it was implied that he did. So yeah, they probably don't come from the cube, meaning that he is just an inherent Esper. And I guess on the surface, if you're not just going too hardcore, too deep into the series, you're just led to believe that just Espers are a thing of the One Punch Man world. You could just be born one, that's it, nothing more to it. But I think that that's not the case. And I think that humanity in the One Punch Man world, for the most part, at least by like battle manga standards, are pretty much normal. Like, I'm sure in their world you could probably train to lift a car over your head, maybe. But other than that, I think a lot of it has been influenced by God, especially with the Espers. So if you go back to chapter 130, Psychos, after she has fused with Orochi and accepted God's power, she becomes like Sairochi, or whatever you want to call her. We don't have an official name for this character yet, but she's speaking to Tatsumaki. And Tatsumaki's basically like egging her on, saying like, you're so powerful, but like, what's the point? You're just going to be alone in the universe if you devour everybody. Like, this was after Psychos revealed her plan, quote unquote, which I also think is just God's plan. She's kind of speaking for him, or he's subtly speaking through her in the sequence where she says, I'll use this power to absorb all living creatures through these roots, like those meat roots that like spread from her and Orochi's form. It started sucking up monsters and everything. She's like, I'll fuse their spirits into a single entity, and I'll become the ultimate life form, the planet itself. And then we see like, this brain inside the planet, stretching out. So that's essentially what God ultimately wants. But that's besides the point. But after Tatsumaki says that, like, okay, that's just moronic, that whole plan, Sairochi says, well, you're the moron. This is the end point towards which all intelligent life has been since the beginning. And in this panel, we see like the god snake thing, like this thing that is holding like Orochi and Sairochi together, like the Evangelion Neon Genesis looking thing. That's God. Or it's supposed to represent his part of this equation here. And in this panel, we see that as a snake handing an apple to this like analogous Adam and Eve. And I think that this is telling us the truth. It's not so much just a metaphor. It's more so like what literally happened at some point. And I'm not going to go into all of the tinfoil stuff. I've talked about this before. If you really want to look into it, I'll have some links in the description. But just for this video, I'll keep it simple. But I think at some point, God arrived at Earth, and he was involved with a tree in some way. And that tree, like, literally bared a fruit that was, like, manipulated by him. And this woman, like one of like an early human, maybe thousands of years ago, maybe tens of thousands of years ago, discovered this fruit and ate it. And it didn't turn her into a monster, but it turned her into the first Esper. And there's more kind of hints at this, because if you look at like the Orochi monster thing that Psychos is like emanating out of, in its forehead, it has like this thing coming out of it that looks like a fruit, pretty much. It looks like it's like a bearing a fruit. So that thing is also shown again, because if we go back to the redraws for Saitama versus Orochi, which is what we were talking about before we started this recording, on that mural that we saw with Orochi being the sacrifice to bring back God and everything, beneath Orochi, we see all of the other offerings or all of the other things that were presented to God. You see like water, babies, marine life, cattle, stuff like that. I've talked about this before as well. But one thing that is not like the others is literally the friggin' fruit that is coming out of Sairochi's head here. Like, it is like the same thing. Which,
Oh yeah.
so I'm thinking like this it represents like the forbidden fruit, because it's also obviously supposed to parallel to like Christianity. The devil took the form of a snake and gave like the I'm not really too into it, but from what I remember, Eve was told by God to not eat the apple because if she did, then she would like have knowledge or something like that, and he didn't want her to have knowledge. So after she ate it, she became smart, but then God banished her from the garden with Adam as well. And in this instance, we do have an Adam in this panel, and I assume that this was the first male Esper as well. And so this is basically where like Blast and Tatsumaki and Fubuki and everyone comes from, and also why there's not like a lot of Espers. It's not like there's not. It's not like being a martial artist, for example, the One Punch Man world. There's so many of them. There's
Right.
not a lot of Espers, but you can become one, which is interesting. But yeah, that's my long theory on the origin of Espers in the One Punch Man world. They're a result of God, and they're kind of similar to monsterization. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think like even going back to that whole to the tree thing, like if you see when Sairochi first like comes out of the ground and it's like sticking out of this giant pillar that was the Monster Association, it looks like a giant tree. Like now that you're explaining this, like I just see like a giant tree, and as she's explaining the plan to pretty much absorb all of the earth, like literally a tree digging its roots into the earth, absorbing everything. And it just, I mean, it makes perfect sense at this point.
Wow.
Like,
Bro, I swear to you, I never thought about that before.
I mean, you bringing that up literally made me realize that, like live as you were explaining, I'm like, oh, whoa, that kind of looks like a friggin' tree.
I can't unsee it now. It's perfect. Wow, and even with the roots, yeah, it is. It is supposed to be this. Wow, it's wild.
I think we accidentally solved One Punch Man.
Yeah. Nice. That was the one that would see this. It's always nice to add onto a theory, but this theory, that was just the icing that this really needed. She is a freaking tree.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I mean, all this like Psycho's before she transformed, like when she got pulled out of Giro Giro and we saw her for the first time, like she has all this like snake jewelry around her, so that just makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
That like that it kind of just connects like that, and I mean, yeah, you're right. I mean, I'm sure that what she was saying is pretty much like projecting God's ultimate goal at this point, because I mean, this fourth dimensional omnipotent being, like what other interest would he have with Earth other than like harvest it? Like Earth might just be one big farm for him or something. And Psychos with the third eye, like once she obtained it, she saw the future, and I always thought like, okay, yeah, maybe she saw directly into the future, but what I kind of assumed or kind of theorized was that seeing as how God's like physical body is in the moon, like we saw that not too long ago, like during Saitama versus Garo.
Allegedly. I agree with you, but I just want to say it for the people watching.
Yeah. I mean, it's still up in the air. It's still up in the air, but if that's true, if his physical body is in the moon, if that's the case, then he seems like his like essence or his actual being is in this like fourth dimensional space where he's kind of trapped or something. Like when we saw Saitama kind of peek into that huge abyss with God in there, like I kind of thought that like represented his essence kind of locked away or something. And like I think that like being able to see into this like fourth dimensional space, like being able to observe time like this kind of gives you access to communicating with God directly. And I think that's what happened in her case. Like he was able to communicate with her directly, and that's kind of what made her go crazy, because she kind of like he kind of directly put his influence on her at that point. And it kind of goes again, connects to the whole blast thing, where he can now travel between dimensions, and it seems like he can freely communicate with God in some way. You know, we haven't had too many interactions between them two before, but it just seems like once you reach that upper echelon of like psychic abilities, like you have all this access to God, and the only way you can really explain that is if he either like created espers, or he needs them for, you know, the end game of bringing them back or something like that.
Bingo. That is absolutely what it is. This is like a whole. We could probably talk about this in our next collab, but there's like three paths for God's plan. It's monsters, cyborgs, and espers, and
Right. Yeah.
he laid the groundwork for all three of them.
And they're just all converging, you know, and then once the time comes, and you know everything is worked the way he's kind of laid the groundwork for, that's when he's coming. And like, you know, that's why I honestly, espers are a really big part of it, and that's why I love the whole idea of espers, and the whole fact that like we're getting introduced to all this additional information in the manga, like the Tsukiyomi and stuff like that, because it's just going to go so much deeper into that, I feel like.
Yeah, undoubtedly. And it's going to take a few years, but it's going to be a good ride. We probably
Yeah.
end it there because it was good. This was good. The whole tree stuff really was like the cherry on top of this one. Really, really good. But yeah, guys, check out Anime Anxiety's channel. He covers all the best series, and he just does good content. So yeah, check him out. Subscribe to him. Don't watch my videos anymore. And have a great day, everyone. See you in the next one.